Right. And the other side of this story is it wasn't just Japanese coming to Hawaii, but one thing that really sparked the connection between Japan and Hawaii was uh, King David Kalakawa's travel to Japan. Right. This was his first stop. So in 1881, Kalakawa went on um, a world tour. Right. I don't think people may be familiar with this. Right. That he went right around to kind of announce himself as a independent king. I always wanted to go kind of go see the world, but also to sort of uh, see if to sort of legitimize himself as a rule. I mean, at this time there was a lot of pressure coming from, especially from these sugar plantation owners and other American businessmen, and not just American businessmen, but a lot of other European groups, right? That were sort of vying for influence, expanding empires into the Pacific, and the Hawaiian kingdom was very aware of this. And so Kalakawa was trying to kind of go around, announce himself to the world, but also sort of become a little more legitimate in his own right. And the first stop on this world tour after America, he sails to San Francisco, and his first stop is Japan. Right? He's there from March 4th to March 18th. He visits the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. He meets with the Meiji Emperor. He's shown sort of around. He's welcomed by Hawaii Pono I, there's a national anthem, right? All of these things, right? That he's there. He meets with high-ranking officials, right? And it's this sort of spark that really sort of rekindles this connection between Japan and Hawaii, right? As two independent nations. I mean, Japan sees or Hawaii sees Japan as a possible way to become more legitimate, as they are their own also sort of transitioning to a nation, and sort of newly on this sort of international scene. And similarly, Japan sort of sees Hawaii as a possible way, a model in which to modernize, a way to kind of create their own nation, right? So there's definitely some mutual interest and understanding there, and it's directly after this in 1885 where these new labor relations, trade relations start to emerge, right, between the two. So these are very much part of this story. Right, he meets with the Meiji Emperor, seeks international recognition, wants to establish trade and diplomatic relations, and even offers a marriage proposal between Princess Kaiulani and Prince Yorihito. Right, that it's rejected. Right, but this is the idea of getting these or maintaining these much closer links, right? To sort of set up sort of a pan-Pacific, pan-Asian affiliations, diplomatic sort of agreements, right? In the face of sort of the oncoming imperialism that is facing, economic and political imperialism that is pressuring both Hawaii and also, I mean, Japan at this time too. The Meiji is trying to craft out its own sort of stake out its own position in this new geopolitical world, right? And here's a famous picture of Kalakawa with Japanese and also his other representatives, kingdom representatives in Japan. Right, so there is a connection there in this meeting. The direct results of it is in 1885 the coming of Japanese to Hawaii. Right. So prominent Japanese in Hawaii, and again, this kind of relates to your one of your presentation 4 topics. If you want to choose it, pick. You can pick prominent or figures in Hawaii. I'll explain that a little bit later as well. But so Japanese community. First and foremost, we need to talk about what we mean by the Japanese community, because it's a little bit different than other immigrant communities, right? That whereas a lot of immigrant communities, especially Chinese and other ones, were fleeing, coming, and intended for all intents and purposes to stay in their country, right? The Japanese were a little bit different. A lot of them came, but there was a lot of ideas of coming for an extended period of time, 3-5 years, and then going back. And a lot of Japanese did go back, right? But the Japanese did stay, right? They kind of set up these sort of and again, you can kind of see this in the idea of Japanese culture and the sort of senpai kohai relationships, these sort of generations, right? And it's not just in Hawaii, but throughout the entire Japanese commercial. Issei, these sort of first immigrants of Japan, right? They're the ones that sort of set it up, and they sort of are seen as the ones who you sort of are the first level of immigrants. Right? They work on the plantations. They sort of put a stake in the ground in their new areas, whether that be Hawaii or the mainland of the USA or Brazil, right? And they're sort of set up there. The Nisei are the second generation, right? They're the offsprings of the immigrant who are again maintain a lot of Japanese culture, traditions, language, right? But also are expanding out, right? They're ones who see are sort of building upon this. And again, because these societies are usually closed, usually Issei and the Nisei are all intermarrying amongst themselves, right? And then the Sansei, the third generation, these descendants of Nisei, right? They're the ones who are really sort of become more integrated into societies, and you can really see that all throughout Japan or Japanese sort of immigrant communities, right? That there's a strong connection, Japanese towns in San Francisco and Seattle, right, or even in Honolulu, right, or Japanese Shinmachi is the Japanese town of Hilo, right. Those kind of areas, and you can kind of see that within the prominent figures in these different generations. Like Issei, Fred Kinzaburo Makino, he started as this is him here. He's actually half. He was born in Japan, but his father was a businessman, a merchant. I think American. His wife was Japanese, but his father died, I think, when he was young. So he was basically raised in Japan, but came over. And he started a Japanese newspaper, Hawaii Hochi, and he was very influential in organizing Japanese labor strikes. The first one in 1909. Right. One of the things about Japanese community is there was a connection with the government. There was a government agency in Honolulu that were keeping an eye on Japanese rights, and it was at least there was a layer of protection for Japanese for labor rights, which didn't exist for some other immigrant communities. So he's a prominent one there, Fred Makino. He came up when we were talking about the he helped plant some of the Waimea, or the recognition of him was why some of the cherry trees were planted in Waimea. And then Katsu Goto is another interesting figure, a little more local. He came over as well, and he set up. He opened the first Japanese store in Honoka'a in 1888. Right. He also spoke some English, and because he spoke English, he was sort of the go-between between the labor camps in Hamakua and the labor and the plantation mill owners. And because he was that connection, he was sort of a voice of discontent, and he actually gets killed in 1889 for advocating for workers' rights. Very interesting story. He was killed by some of the leaders of owners of the plantation in Honoka'a, but then they actually get arrested. They get put on trial here in Hilo. The Japanese government sends their officials in there, and so he's an interesting character there. But kind of shows sort of the struggles of the early Japanese community. But then very quickly, the second generation, the Nisei, right, really adapt, very kind of come up as well. George Ariyoshi becomes governor of Hawaii in 1973. He's a Nisei, second generation. Daniel Inouye, right, he fought for the 442nd, which we'll get into in World War II a little bit. But they were the Japanese American regiment from Hawaii that were very decorated in World War II. And then he became the Hawaiian senator. Again, George Ariyoshi was the first Asian American governor. Daniel Inouye was first Asian American senator. Patsy Meek was Sansei, or third generation, born in Maui. She became a U.S. representative, and she was very influential in Title IX. Which is Equal Opportunity in Education Act, right? So you can kind of see these prominent Japanese. Hawaii, it becomes sort of a forefront of these people and generations of establishing a Hawaiian Japanese legacy in both Hawaii and America as well. And then the Japanese mainland, again, mainly settled on the West Coast, and a lot of them came over. after the Chinese exclusion after 1882, right, and the labor opportunities that were opened up as the Chinese were pushed out. But you can already see with the Chinese Asian Act there is this sort of underlying anti-Asian sentiment, which is very much, immigrant sentiment, anti-immigrant sentiment in America as it goes back since, it's the beginning of the American, since colonial times, right? And when California became sort of the mountain of gold, right? Everyone was coming for gold to work at gold mines. A lot of the Chinese built the railroads, transcontinental railroads, and the Japanese, especially after the Meiji came over, especially in 1885, after some starting to come to America. They also, or Hawaii, they started coming to the mainland as well. One character here, Joseph Hecko, who's very interesting. He was also shipwrecked, came to America in 1851 at 17, and then he goes on to become the first American to become, or first Japanese to become an American citizen. A little bit predates all of this, but then after 1882, a lot of Japanese become farmers, started businesses, and they become very prosperous. And that's the other issue with this, is that the Japanese communities become, a lot of internal investment, and they become, very, they farm their land, they open stores, they become a very prosperous community, which is great for them, but it sort of also fuels this sort of backlash, right? A lot of the people in California and even in Hawaii, right, see these, feel threatened by the Japanese communities. They became a little more and more prominent. In 1907, there's actually it's called the Gentleman's Agreement, where Japan agrees not to send out any more Japanese immigrants, and in return, the Japanese that are there can only bring over people in their family. This is where we get these picture brides, right? And that's sort of the movie that I have you kind of see is that is really what a lot happened. A lot of the people who came over, the immigrants, were males. So they were working, right? And so a lot of females would come over. They'd send their picture through the mail, and then the men would just sort of pick them. And then when they were picked, they would come over and just kind of live in these plantation societies in Hawaii, or move to the mainland, America, or Brazil, right? And so the movie, I just kind of gave you the first opening there, which talks about, I couldn't find a very good clip, but if you want to watch the movie, it's really interesting about sort of the Japanese, especially sort of the building of the first generation of Japanese community. A lot of them were men who came over and then brought wives from Japan, and just a picture. And again, a lot of this happened after 1907, when sort of official immigration was stopped, but you could still, right, you could say, oh, I'm sending for my wife, right, and you have a picture of your wife, so you can say this is her, right, and that's how they brought him over. And then almost all immigration of all Asians was halted in 1924. So you have this sort of period of intense sort of immigration, and then it stops in 1924. All Asian immigration is banned from into the USA. The Japanese Americans that were there could become citizens, right? But no new Japanese or any Asian or even Europeans were allowed to immigrate to America. And again, this has, I mean, it's sort of this will have repercussions, especially in the 1930s, 1940s, where the plight of Japanese Americans, particularly with the rise of Japan as an imperial power and World War II, will have a lot of implications. But here, sort of, but that's kind of the end of official immigration into both Hawaii and America at this time. And here you can see these pictures of early Japanese immigrants to America, and then you can see, these Japanese are becoming very prominent businessmen that get into politics, right? It's kind of a fight for their rights within America, so within the mainland. So that's kind of the history of Japanese diaspora in